I think the evidence is pretty good for the existence of telepathy, not just from my own experiments, but many other people's as well. But the very mention of telepathy creates a kind of strong emotional reaction in committed materialists, because they believe it can't possibly happen because the mind's nothing but the brain and couldn't work at a distance. Therefore, all the evidence for it must be flawed or fraudulent. And they get incredibly angry sometimes about this, because it violates a taboo that the materialist worldview creates against psychic phenomena. But most people in the population don't have a problem with it. In fact, lots of people just take it for granted. And sometimes people say to me, why do you waste your time trying to prove things that everyone already knows? Well, there's a sense in which most people do know these things, but if they've got a university degree, they often feel they ought to pretend that they don't believe in them or they're impossible. So, yes, I think there's a lot of evidence. The interesting thing, though, is if you look at the natural history, telepathy occurs between bonded members of groups. It doesn't happen with random people, or at least not very much. Typically, it happens between dogs and their owners, the people who are strongly bonded with their dogs or their cats or their horses. It occurs between humans, telephone telepathy, between members of families, mothers of children, lovers, husbands and wives, close friends, close colleagues. And I think that it's to do with social bonds between members of bonded social groups. And I think in the wild, among wild animals, it's an essential means of communication when the group splits up. For example, when wolf cubs are left in the den and the adult wolves go out hunting, ranging over tens or even hundreds of miles, the social bonds between the adults and the young in the den are not broken, they stretch, and they can be sensitive to what's happening to the others, especially to things to do with emotions and needs, through these emotional bonds, which are aspects of what I call morphic fields. But these only occur between bonded members of social groups. In a sense, this is the analogy in physics that's closest to this is quantum entanglement. In a quantum system, if electrons or photons leave an atom or molecule, they remain entangled with it, they're still part of the same system. And these non-local connections or entanglements stretch over enormous distances, miles and miles. They don't fall off with distance. But what they depend on, quantum entanglement, depends on having been part of the same system to start with. And I think that's very much the case in telepathy with animals and with people. They're part of the same social group, and even at a distance, this linkage remains. So anyway, I think that telepathy is it reveals something about the way that social bonds work and the way that minds work. And as far as most people are concerned in Britain and everywhere else in the world, this is simply a fact. It's part of everyday life. Most people have had experiences of it. It's only when you enter the kind of educated, academic, materialist, intellectual world that it becomes intensely controversial, and where there's a whole culture of denial. It's remarkable, actually, the denialism around something which is not only part of everyday life for lots of people and for lots of animals, but also something for which there's now very good scientific evidence.